Dear learners, now I am going to talk about the concept of the freedoms. This is the second last unit of the block 2. That is the concept of the freedoms is one of the most fundamentals and complex idea in philosophy, politics, and ethics. Its meaning vary depending upon context, from individuals' autonomy and the absence of constraints to collective political freedoms and liberations from the oppressions. Various philosophical traditions, liberal, extremist, Marxist, and others have offered different interpretations of the freedoms, exploring its natures, limits, and implications. Here is a detailed exploration of the concept of freedoms, including its historical developments, philosophical variations, and key debates. Now come to the second important that talks about the types of the freedoms. Freedoms can be categorized into the several types, reflecting different dimensions of human existence and social organizations. These types often overlap but can be distinguished by clarity. That is negative freedoms or freedom from. Negative freedoms refer to the absence of external constraints or interference. It is the freedoms to act without being obstructed by the others. We're talking about the idea is the central to the liberalisms, especially as the developed by the philosophers like John Locke and Stephen Berlin. In this view, a person is free along as one else interferes with their choices. Freedom from censorship, freedom from imprisonments, freedom to own property and political terms, negative freedom focus on limiting government interference in individual lives. Next is that is talk about the positive freedoms, that is freedom to. Positive freedoms refer to the capacity or ability to act in a way that lead to self-realizations or self-determinations. It emphasizes empowerment, the controls over the one life and destiny. Second important thing that is the philosophical traditions. Positive freedoms is often associated with the philosophers like John Rousseau and Berlins, who say it is the freedoms to achieve one true potentials often require the collective organizations or the removal of social obstacles. Examples: freedom to access educations, to participate in political process, or to develop one's ability in political terms. Positive freedom may be required the state to provide resources or opportunity that enables individuals to exercise real freedoms. Now talking to individual freedoms definitions. Individual freedom political definitions. Individual freedom focus on the personal autonomy, the right to make choice about its own life, body, and decisions. It is often associated with the ethical and existence autonomy. Philosophical traditions. This is central to existentialist thought, as in the work of the state, who argue that humans are condemned to be free because they have to predefine essence and must create themselves through the choices. Freedoms of speech, freedom to marry, not marry, freedom to choose a career, or freedom over one's body is the all the things are called the come under the individual freedoms. Next is that talking about the political freedoms. Political freedom refer to the rights and capacity individuals or groups that have to participate in political decision making, typically within the democratic frameworks. Philosophical traditions, classical thinkers like the Aristotle saw political participations as the central to the freedoms, while modern liberal thinkers like John Stuart Mills and Tocqueville focus on the civil liberty and democratic governance. Freedom to vote, freedom to run for office, freedom of political expressions, and freedom to assembly, these are the call of the political freedom. Now come to the next thing, that is economic freedoms. When we're talking about the economic freedoms, that is economic freedoms refer to the ability to make economic choice such as where to work, how to spend and how to invest, free from excessive government regulations or controls. Economic freedoms is central to the capitalist theory as advocated by the thinkers like the Adam Smith and Philip Mans. It is often seen as a crucial element of overall individual's freedom. free markets, property rights, property freedom to trades, and the right to start a business. Next is called that talking about the collective freedoms. Collective freedoms emphasize the freedoms of a group or a community to determine its fate free from dominations by external power or the other groups. Philosophical traditions. This idea is prominent in nationalists and socialists through the where freedoms involves the self-determinations of a people or class. Nationals' independence, work controls of the productions, and the rights of indigenous peoples to self-governance. Next is talking about the historical developments of the concept of freedoms. Ancient conceptions, Greece and Rome. In the ancient Greeks, freedoms, especially in the Athens, was closely tied to the citizenship and political participations. Only free male citizens had the right to participate in the democratic process. The story, on the other hand, emphasized inner freedoms, the ability to remain the free regardless of external circumstances. Roman republics. In Rome, freedom was tied to the concept of liberty, which involved protections from the arbitrary rules and the legal right to act independent within the systems of law. Medievals and religious freedoms. Christians' theory during the Middle Age, freedom was largely understood in ideological terms as Saint Augustine Mill and discussions freedom as the ability to choose good or evils. Human freedom was seen in relations to the God's will with morals and spiritual dimensions emphasized. Islamic philosophy, Islamic thinkers like the Rusad and the Ghazali had to also explore the freedom in the context of the kind of the free and moral responsibility under the divine soul law. Next, we talking about the Enlightenments and modernity. Enlightenment thinkers in the modern concept of freedom was heavily influenced by the Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke, Rousseau, Kant. Locke's idea of liberty, focus on natural rights, argue that peoples are born free and equal with right to life, liberty, and property. Rousseau, in contrast, Rousseau believed in a moral collective form of the freedoms where true freedom could be only be achieved through the participations in the general will of a democratic community. Individuals must something be forced to be free by following law that they themselves through the collectives have enacted. Kant, he also talked about the freedoms was deeply tied to moral autonomy. Kant believed that individuals are free when they act according to the law. They give themselves through the reasons rather than being driven by the external force or desires. Next, he talk about the moderns and the contemporary conceptions, liberalisms. Modern liberalisms following from the J.S. Mills and Berlin's emphasize both negative and positive freedoms. Mills owns liberty, argued that importance of personal freedoms and self-developments, but also acknowledged the need for limits where harm to otherwise involve. Marxism, Karl Marx critiques liberal notions of freedoms, arguing that true freedom could be not be exist in a capitalist society where most peoples were economically dependent and alienated from the means of productions for Marx. Freedoms from exploitations and the collective controls over the economic life were essential for genuine human freedoms. Existentialisms in the 20th century, existentialists like the John Paul Straits and James D. Behaviors believed view freedoms as fundamental aspects of human existence. For started, freedom meant the radical's ability to choose and create meaningful in a world without the inherent meanings. However, these freedoms also details responsibility as individuals cannot escape their role in shaping their own lives. Next, he talked about the philosophical debates on freedoms, freedom versus determinism. One of the central debates surrounding the freedoms is the questions of whether human beings are truly free or whether our actions are determined by external forces like biology, environment, and social conditions. Libertarians in philosophy, not politics, argue that individuals have free wills and are ultimately authors of their action. Determinists argue that all actions are results of prior cause, meaning that freedoms is an illusion. Capability, like David Hume, argue that freedoms is compatible and with determinisms if freedom is understood as acting according to one's own desires and motivationals, even if those are determined by the external factors. Now come to the freedoms versus equality, liberal thoughts. In liberals' democratic theory, freedoms and equality are often seen as complementary value. However, debates arise over how to balance individuals' freedoms with social and economic equality. Socialism, Marxism, and socialist theory argue that without some level of equality, freedoms is meaningless for the majority. Economic inequality, for example, limits the real choice people can make, thus the limiting their freedoms. Next is that is talking about the freedoms and responsibility. Existentialist thinkers like Starts argue that freedom is not just a privilege but a burden. Since individuals are radically free, they are responsible for their actions and cannot blame fate, society, or others for their choices. This creates a form of existential anxiety as a freedoms entail profound responsibility for one's life. Now come to the concluding part of the concept about the freedoms. Freedoms is a multifaceted concept that spans political philosophy, economics, and ethical dilemmas. From negative freedoms, absence of constraints, to positive freedoms, focus on personal and collective empowerments, and the concept evolve across the different contexts. The tensions between the individual's autonomy and collective responsibility, as well as between the freedoms and equality, continue to spur philosophical and political debates in contemporary society. Freedom in all forms remains central to the questions of human agency, justice, and the organizations of the society. Thank you. Thank you for listening. This lectures the concept of the freedoms. Thanks.